A world of gods and monsters is shaped by its teachers. Among them stands a figure of profound contradiction, a creature both beast and sage, who mentored the greatest heroes of Greek myth. His name is Chiron, the noble centaur healer. By the end of this journey, you will understand how this immortal being transformed his own eternal agony into a legacy of wisdom that still echoes today. How did a creature born of deception become a symbol of ultimate compassion? What does his final, shocking sacrifice reveal about the price of knowledge? What kind of teacher could tame the wildness within himself to guide legends toward their destiny? His story begins not in a moment of triumph, but in one of divine deception. The father of Chiron was Cronus, the great titan who once ruled the cosmos, and his mother was the gentle sea nymph Philyra. Their union was born of a desperate ruse. Fearing the wrath of his wife, the goddess Re, Cronus transformed himself into a magnificent stallion to conceal his identity while pursuing Philyra. From this act of metamorphosis and secrecy, Chiron was born, emerging into the world with a form that reflected the very moment of his conception. The upper body of a man, wise and noble, fused with the powerful, graceful form of a horse. This origin immediately set him apart. While other centaurs were born from a cloud shaped by the lust of a king and were wild, brutish creatures of appetite and chaos, Chiron was of direct divine lineage. He was not a monster of chance, but a deliberate, if complicated, child of a titan. His very body was a testament to a hidden truth, a living symbol of a god's passion and fear. And as a gift, or perhaps a burden from his father Cronus, Chiron was granted immortality. He would not age, he would not fall to common illness, and he would walk the earth for all time. Yet this glorious heritage made him an eternal outcast. To the savage centaurs of the forests and mountains, he was too refined, too thoughtful, too unlike them. He represented a civilized ideal they rejected. To the gods and mortals, however, he was still a centaur, a creature they viewed with deep suspicion and often outright contempt. He belonged wholly to neither world, caught between two natures. So Chiron did what the truly wise must do. He forged a third path entirely. He retreated from the chaos of both societies, not in bitterness but in purposeful solitude. He found a home in the quiet, sacred caves of Mount Pelion, a place of serene beauty far from the tumult of the world. There he turned his dual nature not into a curse but into his greatest strength. His equine half granted him profound connection to the natural world, an understanding of herbs, roots, and the rhythms of the earth itself. His human half, blessed with a titan's intellect, sought to comprehend, to systematize, to teach. He became a student of the universe, and in doing so, prepared himself to become its greatest tutor. But what does a being who is neither god nor man, who is immortal yet isolated, choose to learn? The answer would redefine heroism itself. His profound isolation, however, could not protect him from the violence of the world he had left behind. The turning point arrived with the thunderous footsteps of a hero, Heracles, the son of Zeus, during one of his legendary labors. In a chaotic skirmish with a tribe of wild centaurs, a single, misaimed arrow flew from Heracles' mighty bow. Its target was not the noble centaur, but in the frenzy of battle, fate intervened. The arrow, tipped with a poison of unimaginable torment, found its mark in Chiron's thigh. This was no ordinary weapon. The arrowhead was coated in the black, festering blood of the Lernaean Hydra, the many-headed serpent Heracles had slain. This venom carried a curse, a divine affliction designed to cause suffering so profound that death would be a mercy. For a mortal, it would mean a swift and gruesome end. For an immortal like Chiron, it meant something infinitely worse, an eternity of agony. The greatest physician in all of Greece, the master of every herb and healing art, was now host to a sickness he could not diagnose and a wound he could not mend. The irony was a cruelty worthy of the gods themselves. The being who had spent centuries learning to soothe the pains of others was now condemned to an unending, fevered torment. Every moment was a lesson in helplessness, a brutal reminder that even his vast knowledge had its limits. The poison did not just burn, it seemed to writhe within him, a living echo of the Hydra's own chaotic malice. His sanctuary on Mount Pelion became a prison, its serene caves now echoing with the silent screams of a healer who could not heal himself. This wound, this eternal, incurable suffering, became the central crucible of Chiron's existence. It transformed his immortality from a gift into a sentence, forcing upon him a question with no answer. How does one find purpose when the very core of one's being is defined by unceasing pain? The answer he would eventually find would not be about curing his own condition, but about transforming its meaning entirely. Yet from this crucible of endless pain, Chiron forged his true legacy. He did not retreat into bitter solitude. Instead, he opened the doors of his cave on Mount Pelion, transforming his personal sanctuary into the ancient world's most extraordinary school. Here, amidst the scent of drying herbs and the soft light filtering through stone, the wounded healer became the mentor to legends. His pupils were not ordinary children. They were the sons of gods and mortal kings, young demigods brimming with chaotic power and divine destiny. Chiron understood that to shape a hero, you must educate the whole being. His curriculum was a masterpiece of balance. A day might begin with the rigorous discipline of spear throwing and wrestling, training the body for the brutal realities of war. But the afternoon would be devoted to the gentle art of plucking a lyre, because a true leader must understand harmony as well as conflict. Students learn the properties of every root and leaf in his vast herbal garden, studying the art of healing even as they mastered the art of killing. Ethics and philosophy were woven into every lesson, for what is strength without wisdom or power without compassion? Look at the roster of students who emerged from his care. There was Asclepius, who learned the secrets of medicine so deeply he would later become the god of healing himself, his serpent-entwined staff a symbol still used today. There was the mighty Achilles, taught not just to be the greatest warrior of his age, but also a skilled musician, a man of complex spirit destined for tragic glory. Jason, before he sought the Golden Fleece, learned the arts of command and survival under Chiron's guidance, and the hunter Actaeon was trained to read the forest as a scholar reads a text, though his own story would end in a terrible lesson about the wrath of the gods. Chiron saw the raw material in each boy, the divine spark tangled with mortal frailty, and he worked to refine it. He was the archetype of the wise teacher, the patient guide who recognizes that destiny is not a pre-written path, but a potential that must be carefully, lovingly cultivated. In his quiet cave, the very pain that haunted him seemed to deepen his empathy, his understanding of every wound, whether of the flesh or the spirit. He taught these future heroes that to be truly great, one must master the wilderness within as well as the monsters without. So we must ask, what kind of lessons could possibly prepare a mortal for immortality? And what happens when the student is destined to surpass the teacher in every way? But perhaps his most profound lesson was taught not with words but with plants and potions. While Chiron trained heroes in the arts of war, his true mastery lay in the opposite pursuit, the art of healing. In the quiet corners of his cave, amidst clay jars filled with dried leaves and bundles of fragrant roots, he practiced what the Greeks would come to see as the very foundation of medicine. He was, in every sense, the father of Greek healing, a bridge between the mystical knowledge of the gods and the practical needs of humanity. His understanding was holistic, seeing illness not just as a physical malady, but as a disharmony between the body and the natural world. He catalogued the properties of every herb on Mount Pelion, learning which could soothe a fever, which could mend a broken bone, and which could bring a troubled mind back to peace. Ancient sources credit him with discovering the uses of plants like Centaur, a bitter herb still used in traditional remedies today, named in his honor. His knowledge extended beyond simple poultices. He was a skilled surgeon, developing techniques for setting fractures and cleaning wounds, practices that would have been revolutionary in a time when injury often meant death or lifelong disability. And woven through all this practical skill was a layer of the sacred. He was said to employ healing chants and incantations, understanding that belief and ritual were powerful medicines in themselves. This entire vast library of wisdom, this compassionate science, found its most brilliant pupil in a young demigod named Asclepius. Chiron saw in the boy a rare gift, an intuitive connection to the vital force of life itself. He taught Asclepius everything he knew, from the grinding of herbs to the philosophy that healing was a sacred duty, a form of service to all living things. Asclepius learned so well that he eventually surpassed his mentor, his skill becoming so great that he could reportedly restore the dead to life, a power that would ultimately draw the ire of the gods and lead to his own apotheosis as the divine god of medicine. The symbol of Asclepius, a single serpent coiled around a staff, remains the universal emblem of healing to this day, a direct legacy of Chiron's cave. This connection to real history is profound. While Chiron is a mythical figure, the practices attributed to him, herbalism, surgery, the healer's code, directly mirror the emerging practices of early Greek physicians. His myth likely served as a divine archetype, a story that gave legitimacy and sacred purpose to the fledgling medical arts. It told society that healing was not mere craft, but a noble pursuit learned from the wisest of teachers. And at the heart of this entire practice was Chiron's own incurable wound. His eternal pain did not make him a bitter recluse, but a more compassionate teacher. He understood suffering intimately, not as a theory, but as a constant companion. This made him a healer who saw the whole person, not just the injury. He knew that to mend a body, you must also acknowledge the spirit's anguish. In this way, his greatest weakness became the source of his ultimate strength. Yet, for all his wisdom and healing power, a shadow lingered in his cave, a question his vast knowledge could not answer. What becomes of an immortal teacher when his most famous student achieves a form of glory that he himself can never reach? Chiron's philosophy was not written on scrolls, but lived in the very fiber of his being. His existence was the ultimate lesson in balance. Here was a creature whose human half reached for the stars, for music, medicine, and reason, while his equine half remained rooted in the earth, connected to raw instinct, primal strength, and the untamed wilderness. This was not a conflict to be resolved, but a harmony to be achieved. He taught that true excellence, what the Greeks called arete, was not the victory of civilization over nature or of mind over body. It was the integration of both. A hero must think with clarity and act with ferocity. A healer must understand the logic of anatomy and the instinct of compassion. In his cave, the strum of the lyre and the scent of wild herbs coexisted with the lessons of combat because a whole life demanded all these facets. This integration reached its deepest expression in how he bore his suffering. Struck by an incurable, agonizing wound, Chiron presented the ancient world with a profound image of stoic dignity. He did not rage against the gods or descend into self-pity. Instead, he endured. His immortality, once a gift, became the arena for his greatest demonstration of strength, the strength to persist with purpose despite unending pain. This was not passive resignation, but active endurance. He transformed his personal torment into a wellspring of empathy, allowing him to guide his pupils through their own trials with unparalleled understanding. He knew that suffering was an inescapable thread in the fabric of life, and that nobility lay in how one wove it into their character. His role as a mentor flowed directly from this balance. He did not seek to create copies of himself, but to draw out the unique potential, the inherent arete within each student. For the gentle Asclepius, he nurtured a healer's hands. For the fiery Achilles, he honed a warrior's spirit while cultivating a musician's soul, hoping to instill sophrosyne, that crucial moderation and self-restraint to temper the boy's legendary rage. Chiron was the steady compass in the chaotic storm of destiny that surrounded these demigods. In a mythological world ruled by the whims and passions of gods, where heroes often fell victim to their own hubris, Chiron stood as a testament to a different ideal: wisdom earned through quiet study, compassion forged in pain, and guidance offered without expectation of glory. He represented the enduring hope that even in a universe of monsters and capricious deities, there was a path to excellence guided by reason, empathy, and balance. Yet this very ideal, this perfect mentor, was trapped in an immortal body decaying from a wound that would never heal. His wisdom could guide others toward their destinies, but it could not free him from his own eternal sentence. This presents us with the final, heartbreaking paradox of his existence. If true nobility is found in enduring suffering with purpose, what happens when that purpose is fulfilled and only the suffering remains? The answer to that final paradox lies not on the earth, but in the heavens above. For Chiron's story does not end with his eternal agony, but with a release so profound it required the intervention of the king of the gods himself. After ages of bearing the Hydra's poison, a moment of unexpected grace arrived. The great hero Heracles, whose errant arrow had caused the wound, was himself undergoing a torment, bound to a burning pyre to end his mortal life. Seeing his friends suffering and remembering his own unintended crime, Heracles pleaded with his father, Zeus. He asked for a way to free the noble Centaur from his endless pain. Moved by this compassion and by Chiron's own unwavering dignity across the centuries, Zeus offered a solution of cosmic scale. Chiron, the immortal, would be allowed to die. He would voluntarily surrender his immortality, transferring it to the Titan Prometheus, who was chained to a rock as eternal punishment for giving fire to humanity. This act was the ultimate sacrifice and the ultimate healing. Chiron used his own death as a cure, not for himself but for another suffering being. In return for his nobility and his service to the gods' own children, Zeus granted Chiron a different kind of eternity. He lifted the Centaur's spirit into the night sky, immortalizing him as the constellation Centaurus. Some ancient storytellers, focusing on his role as a mentor and archer, even identified him with the constellation Sagittarius, the archer. Look to the southern sky on a clear night, and you can find his celestial form. Centaurus is one of the largest and brightest constellations, anchored by the dazzling star Alpha Centauri, which is actually our Sun's closest neighboring star system. The constellation depicts a centaur, often shown with a spear or holding the wolf constellation, Lupus. For ancient cultures gazing upward, this brilliant pattern was not just a random scattering of lights. It was a story written in the cosmos, a permanent tribute to the wise teacher. They saw in those stars the shape of the healer who walked the earth, now forever free from pain, guiding sailors and storytellers from his place in the heavens. His catastrophism, his becoming a star, was the final and most fitting lesson. It taught that true legacy transcends the suffering of the body. Chiron's wisdom, his compassion, his balance were so fundamental to the order of things that they earned a place in the very architecture of the night sky. His light, quite literally, still reaches us today, but this celestial ending invites a deeper question about the world he left behind. If the teacher is now among the stars, what became of the students he shaped, and how did their own legendary journeys ultimately reflect the lessons learned in that quiet cave on Mount Pelion? To understand Chiron's true nature, we must first see him against the chaotic backdrop of his own kind. The centaurs of Greek myth were not gentle forest creatures. They were forces of untamed chaos, embodiments of raw appetite and violence. Picture the infamous wedding feast of Pirithous, king of the Lapiths. When the centaurs were invited, they descended not as guests but as a rampaging horde. Drunk on unmixed wine, a substance they were not accustomed to, their primal instincts erupted. They assaulted the women, smashed the tables, and turned a celebration into a bloody battlefield. This was their defining image, lustful, drunken, and savage, forever at war with the very concept of civilization they so craved to possess. Another infamous centaur, Nessus, perfectly captures this deceitful brutality. When he attempted to assault Heracles' wife, Deianira, the hero shot him with a poisoned arrow. With his dying breath, Nessus crafted a vicious revenge, tricking Deianira into taking his poisoned blood as a love potion, a deception that would ultimately lead to Heracles' own agonizing death. These centaurs were creatures of impulse, their human intelligence perverted to serve their bestial hunger. Chiron stood as their polar opposite, a solitary beacon of light in that darkness. His difference was rooted in his very origin. While most centaurs were born from a cloud magically shaped by a king's lust, Chiron was the direct son of the Titan Cronus. This divine parentage granted him not just immortality, but an inherent nobility of spirit. He was of a different order of being entirely. Where the other centaurs surrendered to their instincts, Chiron mastered his. He saw the wildness within not as a master to obey, but as a powerful force to be integrated, disciplined, and directed. He did not merely reject the centaurs' violent ways, he built a new philosophy over the ruins of their chaos. While they sought to take from civilization through force, he sought to contribute to it through knowledge. His cave on Mount Pelion was not a den of revelry, but a temple of study. The scent there was of drying herbs and parchment, not sour wine. The sounds were of lyre strings and thoughtful debate, not drunken roars. This profound choice highlights the central theme of his legend, the power of rising above one's origins. Chiron's story insists that nature is not an unchangeable destiny. He was born into a form associated with monstrosity, yet he consciously, tirelessly chose the path of wisdom. He transformed the very symbols of his kind. The centaur's strong equine body, used by others for pillaging, became for Chiron a connection to the healing earth. The human mind, used by others for cunning deception, became in him an instrument of profound understanding. He proved that identity is not a cage, but a set of materials from which one can build a legacy. His existence was a quiet, enduring rebuke to the chaos of his kin, demonstrating that true strength lies not in unleashing one's inner beast, but in forging it into a disciplined ally. This deliberate separation made him a figure of immense respect, but also of profound isolation. He was a king without a kingdom, a teacher whose finest students would always leave to fulfill their own glorious and often tragic destinies. And it makes us wonder, in the silent moments between pupils, did his thoughts ever turn to the simple, brutal fellowship of the Cent, or herd he had forever left behind? Yet this celestial peace was not his original destiny. To reach the stars, Chiron first had to broker a deal that reshaped the fate of two immortals. The key was a prophecy, a cryptic thread of divine law that stated the Titan Prometheus could only be freed from his torment if an immortal being willingly took his place. For centuries, Prometheus had been chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, his liver torn out daily by a giant eagle as punishment for stealing fire for humanity. His was an agony of defiance, a suffering born of compassion for mortals. Meanwhile, Chiron endured his own private hell, the Hydra's poison a constant fire in his veins. Both were prisoners of pain, but their sentences seemed unbreakable, one by divine decree, the other by his own immortal nature. The solution arrived through Heracles. On his quest for the golden apples of the Hesperides, the hero came across the chained Titan. Moved by Prometheus's plight and perhaps burdened by the guilt of his own poisoned arrow, Heracles acted as the catalyst. He slew the eagle, but he could not break the chains. The original curse of Zeus still held. Heracles then ascended to Olympus, pleading his father for a compromise. He presented the prophecy and offered a radical exchange, Chiron's immortality for Prometheus's freedom. For Chiron, this was not a grim sacrifice, but a profound release. His endless life had become an endless sentence, to trade his painful immortality for a meaningful death, and to use that death to liberate another who suffered for a noble cause was the ultimate act of healing. It was the final, logical extension of his philosophy. He had spent eons teaching others how to live with purpose and face their destinies. Now he would demonstrate how to meet an end with purpose, transforming his greatest vulnerability into another's salvation. He voluntarily descended to the underworld, taking the place of Prometheus in the shadows of Tartarus. In that moment, two of mythology's most profound narratives intertwined. The rebel who gifted humanity with knowledge and the healer who shaped its greatest heroes were linked by a single, selfless choice. Chiron's act did more than free a titan. It completed his own arc, proving that even an immortal's fate is not fixed, but can be rewritten by courage and compassion. His story asks us, what greater use could one make of a life than to willingly end it so that another's suffering might cease? But the quiet cave on Mount Pelion was not only a school for heroes, it was also a home. Beyond his role as mentor, Chiron cultivated a family life, a tender and often tragic dimension of his story that reveals the full depth of his character. His wife was the nymph Chariklo, a being of grace and beauty whose very name means graceful spinner. She was not merely a companion but a partner in his sanctuary, sharing in the quiet rhythms of their isolated life. Together they raised children, weaving the noble Centaur directly into the complex family tree of Greek mythology. Their daughter was Osyho, whose name means swift-flowing, a hint at her own extraordinary gift. She possessed the power of prophecy, the ability to see the unchangeable threads of fate. In a moment of terrible clarity, she foresaw not only her father's agonizing wound from Heracles' poisoned arrow, but also his eventual release through death and apotheosis. Overwhelmed by the vision and compelled to speak the truth, she revealed these divine secrets aloud. For this transgression, for unveiling the fixed plans of the gods, she was punished. Zeus transformed her into a mare, silencing her human voice and binding her prophetic mind to an animal form. It is a heartbreaking story, a father forced to witness his own child's fate while being powerless to prevent it. Chiron, the master healer who could mend almost any wound, could not heal the curse placed upon his daughter by the king of the gods. This tragedy adds a profound layer of personal suffering to his myth, a private grief that ran parallel to his own physical torment. His family line extended further through another daughter, Endes. She married the hero Aeacus and became the mother of Peleus, who would later, with the sea nymph Thetis, father the great Achilles. This means Chiron was not just Achilles' teacher, he was also his great-grandfather. The legendary warrior was, in a very real sense, coming home to family when he was sent to Mount Pelion for his education. This familial connection makes Chiron's guidance of Achilles even more poignant. He was not just shaping a pupil of immense potential, he was nurturing his own bloodline, imparting wisdom to a descendant whose glory and tragedy he must have contemplated with a grandfather's heavy heart. These stories of Chariklo, Osyho, and Endes complete the portrait of the Centaur. They show us that his cave was a place of love and loss as much as learning. He was a husband who shared his life with a devoted partner, a father who knew the unique pain of seeing a child's destiny turn to sorrow, and a patriarch whose legacy flowed directly into the epic of the Trojan War. This domestic tapestry reminds us that even the wisest and most disciplined among us are never insulated from the vulnerabilities of the heart. How does a being who counsels others on fate bear the weight of knowing his own families? Chiron's very body was a philosophical argument made flesh. To the ancient Greeks, the centaur was not a whimsical creature of fantasy, but a powerful, unsettling symbol. It represented the eternal and often violent struggle within every person, the clash between the civilized mind and the untamed instinct, the ordered polis of the city and the wild chaos of the forest. In most myths, this struggle ended in disaster. The centaur's human intelligence was hijacked by its animal passions, leading to the drunken rampages and primal lust that made them monsters in the eyes of civilization. They were a walking warning of what happens when the beast wins, but Chiron defied this entire narrative. In him, the two halves did not war, they conversed. They achieved a profound and powerful harmony. His upper human form was the seat of reason, culture, and intellect. This was the part that studied the stars, composed music, understood the complex properties of herbs, and articulated the ethics of a hero. It represented Apollo, the god of light, healing, and rational order. His equine body, in contrast, was pure physicality, strength, endurance, and a deep, intuitive connection to the natural world. This was the part that knew the mountain paths by instinct, that understood the cycles of growth and decay in the forest, that carried the raw vitality of life itself. It represented Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, instinct, and untamed nature. Chiron did not suppress his animal half, he educated it. He did not let his intellect float away into abstraction, he grounded it in the physical earth. This mastery of duality is what made him the ultimate teacher. He could show a young hero like Achilles how to channel his godlike rage, a force as wild as any stallion, into the disciplined, precise strike of a warrior. He could teach Asclepius that healing was both a science of the mind and an art of the hands, requiring knowledge from scrolls and intuition from the soil. His entire existence was a lesson in sophrosyne, that crucial Greek ideal of moderation and self-control. True self-mastery, Chiron demonstrated, is not about destroying your inner nature, but about integrating it. It is about putting reason in the saddle, so to speak, and letting your strength carry you toward purposeful, noble ends. This symbolic harmony resonates far beyond myth. It speaks to the human condition itself. We all contain multitudes, the impulse to create and the urge to destroy, the desire for community and the pull of solitude, the reach of our dreams and the weight of our bodies. Chiron's myth suggests that wholeness, and perhaps even wisdom, is found not by choosing one side over the other, but by building a bridge between them. His quiet cave was that bridge, a place where the lyre's melody could ring out from a form born of primal passion, where healing knowledge grew from a wound that would never heal. So if the Centaur's form is a map of our inner conflict, then Chiron's life is the guide to navigating it. But this perfect balance he embodied raises a final, haunting question about the world he influenced. If the teacher achieved such harmony, why did so many of his brilliant, beloved students meet such spectacularly tragic ends? The most famous ship in all of mythology, the Argo, carried a crew whose very names were legends. And the hand that guided many of them, long before they ever saw its hull, belonged to the Centaur in his mountain cave. Jason's story is inseparable from Chiron's mentorship. When Jason was just an infant, his father, King Aeson, was overthrown by the usurper Pelias. Fearing for his son's life, Aeson smuggled the baby away, entrusting him to the one being in all of Greece known for wisdom and safety. Chiron received the royal infant and raised him as his own in the sanctuary of Mount Pelion. He named the boy Jason, which means healer, a direct tribute to his own life's work and a hope for the child's future. Under Chiron's care, Jason did not just grow, he was sculpted. The lessons were those of a future king and quest leader. He learned the arts of combat, yes, but more importantly, he learned the art of command. Chiron taught him how to read the land for survival, how to judge character in men, and how to bear the weight of difficult decisions. This was not training for a solitary warrior, but for a man who would one day need to unite a band of proud, contentious heroes toward a single, impossible goal, the retrieval of the Golden Fleece. Years later, when the Argo was finally built and its crew gathered, Jason's journey led him back to the very shores below his childhood home. Before striking out into the unknown Black Sea, the Argonauts made a deliberate, almost pilgrim-like stop at Mount Pelion. They beached their ship and climbed the familiar path to Chiron's cave. Imagine that reunion, the young man, now a leader tempered by early trials, standing before the aged Centaur who had shaped his first years. The other heroes, figures like Heracles, Orpheus, and the Dioscuri, would have witnessed a profound and personal moment. Chiron, with his wife Chariclo beside him, welcomed them. He did not offer them new weapons or magic charms. His gift was far more valuable, his blessing and his counsel. He reinforced the lessons of Jason's youth, emphasizing the virtues of loyalty, perseverance, and wise leadership. For the other Argonauts, many of whom were also descendants of gods or pupils of other teachers, this visit was a powerful endorsement. It signified that their quest was not just a daring adventure, but a noble endeavor sanctioned by the wisest mind in the world. Chiron's cave was the last touchstone of the known world, a place where the chaotic energy of a heroic quest was grounded in ancient wisdom before being launched into the realm of monsters and magic. This scene is a beautiful crystallization of Chiron's enduring role. His formal teaching had ended long ago, yet his influence was a living, active force. He was not a relic of the past, but a continuing source of strength. The bond between teacher and student had matured into one between a sage and a champion. Jason sought not just approval, but a reaffirmation of the principles that would guide him through the trials ahead. In giving his blessing, Chiron performed his final, vital act for this particular hero. He sent the finished work out into the world, trusting that the foundations he had built would hold. It is a moment that echoes in the life of any great mentor. The bittersweet pride of seeing a pupil embark on their own epic, carrying your lessons as their inner compass. The Argo sailed with the Centaur's wisdom in its very timbers, a quiet, steady counterbalance to the roaring seas and roaring egos it would inevitably face. The shadow of the Argo had long since faded from the shore, but another child was growing within the stone walls of the Centaur's cave, one whose name would echo far louder than Jason's. This was Achilles, son of the mortal king Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis, and his arrival was born of prophecy and fear. Knowing her son was destined for either a short, glorious life or a long, obscure one, Thetis sought to make him invulnerable, dipping the infant in the magical waters of the river Styx. She held him by the heel, leaving that one spot untouched and forever mortal. Fearing for his safety in a world of political intrigue, she then brought the boy to the one being she trusted to prepare him for either destiny. Chiron, her own father-in-law through marriage, accepted the golden-haired child. His task was monumental, to forge a demigod of divine rage and oceanic sorrow into a man who could wield his power, not just be ruled by it. The curriculum began not with weapons, but with the very essence of wildness. Ancient sources say Chiron fed the young Achilles the marrow of lions and the hearts of bears, not as mere superstition, but as a profound symbolic act. The Greeks believed you absorbed the qualities of what you consumed. To instill fearless courage and raw, untamable strength, the boy was given the vital core of the mightiest predators of the mountain. This was the first lesson in integration, taking the wild, bestial power and making it part of the hero's own flesh and spirit. From this primal foundation, Chiron built a schedule of astonishing balance. Mornings were for the brutal, physical realities of war. Achilles learned to handle the heavy spear, to throw with unerring accuracy, to run with a speed that would later earn him the title swift-footed. He wrestled and trained his body to be an instrument of perfect, lethal force, but the afternoons held a different kind of discipline. Chiron would place a lyre in the young hero's hands, teaching him to pluck melodies that could soothe a restless heart or stir the spirit before battle. Here, in the soft echoes of the cave, the future scourge of Troy learned harmony, rhythm, and the emotional language of music. He was also instructed in the healing arts, learning to treat the very wounds he would one day inflict. This was Chiron's masterstroke. He was not creating a mindless weapon, but a complete person. The music cultivated the sensitivity to feel loss and glory. The medicine instilled a respect for the fragility of life, even as combat training taught him to take it. Throughout it all, their relationship deepened beyond student and teacher. In the many vase paintings of antiquity, Chiron is shown gently handing the infant Achilles to his mother, or patiently guiding the boy's hands on the lyre. He became a foster father, the steady, masculine presence that balanced the boy's absent divine mother and mortal king father. Chiron provided the emotional anchor, the patient discipline, and the unconditional belief that this tempestuous child was capable of greatness. He saw the hurricane within Achilles and taught him to steer it. This education directly shaped every facet of the hero who would dominate the Iliad. His legendary speed and peerless skill with the spear were honed on Mount Pelion. His profound lyrical grief over his companion Patroclus, a grief expressed with the depth of a poet, sprang from the soul nurtured by music. Even his complex relationship with authority, his searing rage at dishonor, was likely tempered by Chiron's lessons on honor and the consequences of pride. The Centaur gave Achilles the tools for legend, but he could not alter the fate written in the stars. He prepared the boy for a glorious life, knowing it would be tragically brief, teaching him to find beauty and meaning within that brutal frame. The teacher had done his work with infinite care, forging a weapon of war with the soul of an artist. And when Thetis finally came to take her son away to his destiny, Chiron must have watched him go with a heart full of pride and a quiet, unspoken dread, knowing the limits of even a teacher's power against the threads of fate. While Achilles learned to master the spear, another pupil in the cave was mastering a far gentler art. Asclepius, the son of Apollo, arrived with a different kind of destiny. Chiron saw in the boy not a warrior's fury, but a healer's quiet focus, an intuitive connection to the very spark of life. Under the Centaur's guidance, the study of medicine transformed from folk practice into a sacred science. Chiron taught Asclepius everything he knew. They wandered the slopes of Mount Pelion, cataloging every leaf and root. This herb could lower a fever, that fungus could numb a wound, this bitter bark could steady a racing heart. But the lessons went far beyond simple herbalism. Chiron instructed the young demigod in the precise art of surgery, how to set a bone with careful alignment, how to clean a wound to prevent the spread of corruption, how to use simple tools to extract an arrowhead with minimal damage. He taught diagnosis, the skill of listening to a body's whispers, the rattle in a chest, the heat of the skin, the story told by a pulse. The most profound knowledge, however, was philosophical. Chiron instilled in Asclepius the healer's code, that this art was a form of service, a sacred trust between the one who knows and the one who suffers. Compassion was not separate from the treatment, it was the foundation of it. Asclepius learned so deeply that he eventually surpassed his mentor. His skill grew so profound that legends say he could not just cure illness but reverse death itself, restoring life to those who had passed. This act, a challenge to the natural order and the dominion of Hades, would ultimately lead Zeus to strike him down with a thunderbolt, only for Apollo to then elevate his son to full godhood as the divine patron of medicine. His symbol, given to him by Apollo, became the rod of Asclepius, a single, non-venomous serpent coiled around a simple, rough-hewn staff. This is crucial. It is not the caduceus, the staff with two snakes and wings carried by the messenger god Hermes. That symbol, often mistakenly used today, represented commerce, negotiation, and trickery. The single serpent of Asclepius has a different, powerful meaning. The snake, which sheds its skin, was an ancient symbol of rebirth, renewal, and healing. The staff represented support, the journey, and perhaps the very walking stick of a traveling physician. Together, they embodied the core idea: healing is a process of renewal guided by wisdom. This symbol, born from the teachings in Chiron's cave, is the true and enduring emblem of medicine, seen on ambulances, hospitals, and medical insignia across the globe. The legacy moved from myth into tangible reality. Across ancient Greece, healing cults dedicated to Asclepius established sanctuaries called Asclepia. The most famous were at Epidaurus, Kos, and Pergamon. These were not just temples for prayer, they were the first holistic medical centers. Patients would undergo rituals of purification, then sleep in a special hall called the abaton. In their dreams, the god Asclepius or one of his sacred snakes would appear, offering a diagnosis or treatment. Priests, acting as physicians, would interpret these dreams and prescribe therapies, herbal remedies, dietary changes, therapeutic baths, and even early forms of surgery and physical therapy. The sanctuary at Epidaurus included a vast theater for emotional catharsis and a stadium for physical exercise, understanding the connection between mind, body, and spirit. These practices, rooted in the divine myth of Asclepius and by extension the teachings of Chiron, formed the bedrock of Western medical tradition. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, is said to have studied at the Asclepion on Kos, directly linking the rational, observational methods of the Hippocratic Oath to this mythic lineage. So when we see that single serpent on a staff, we are seeing a direct line back to a centaur's cave, where a wounded teacher shared the secrets of the earth with a boy who would become a god, proving that the greatest lessons can grow from the deepest pain. The very air in Chiron's cave must have carried the scent of drying rosemary, crushed mint, and the earthy fragrance of roots pulled from dark soil. This was his true library, a living collection of remedies more valuable than any scroll. While he taught the arts of war, his most profound work was done here in the quiet study of the green world. The ancient Greeks saw nature not as a passive backdrop, but as a vast, interactive pharmacy. Every plant held a potential, a spirit, and a purpose. Some leaves could knit a wound, others could calm a racing heart, and certain berries could send a fevered mind into a healing sleep. But this knowledge was not obvious. It required a master interpreter, a being who could listen to the whispers of the earth. Chiron, with his equine half-rooted in the wilderness and his human intellect devoted to understanding, was the perfect bridge. He became the mythic archetype of the herbalist, the one who could translate the silent language of plants into tangible relief for suffering. One plant is forever linked to his name, Centaur. This small, pink-flowered herb, known for its intensely bitter taste, was said to be his great discovery. He used it to treat wounds and fevers, and its very name, Centaurium, is a direct tribute to the centaur healer. Ancient texts describe him using it to cleanse injuries and purify the blood, a testament to its real-world antiseptic and digestive properties that herbalists still acknowledge today. But his knowledge went far beyond a single herb. He was a master of the pharmakon, a potent Greek word that meant both poison and cure. This duality was central to his art. The same plant that could kill in one dose might heal in another, prepared a different way. The venom of a snake could become an antidote. Chiron understood this delicate balance intimately, perhaps because he himself lived within it, his body a vessel for both immortal life and incurable poison. He would have known which mushrooms brought visions and which brought death, which roots could ease a pain and which could stop a heart. This was not magic in a wand-waving sense, but a deep, empirical science. He observed how animals nibbled certain leaves when ill. He noted which plants thrived near healing springs, and he experimented with preparations, teas, poultices, tinctures, and salves. Imagine him in the morning light, his powerful equine legs carrying him through dewy meadows, his human hands carefully selecting only the healthiest specimens. He would gather yarrow to staunch the bleeding of a training wound, valerian root to soothe a pupil's troubled sleep, and perhaps the mysterious moly, a mythical herb Hermes gave to Odysseus to ward off enchantment, a symbol of the healer's power to protect both body and mind. His herbalism was holistic. He treated the whole person, believing a physical ailment could stem from an imbalance of the humors or a disturbance of the spirit. A remedy might therefore include not just a drink of willow bark tea for pain, but also a recommendation for rest, a calming melody on the lyre, and a walk in the forest to restore harmony. This approach made his cave the first true wellness center, where the lines between medicine, psychology, and spiritual care were seamlessly woven together. His legacy lived on in the illustrated herbals of later centuries, scrolls and books that depicted centaurs, often in his image, holding bundles of healing plants, forever linking the healer's form to the bounty of the earth. In Chiron's hands, the wild was not a place of danger to be conquered, but a generous, if stern, teacher offering its own solutions to the suffering it sometimes caused. And this deep communion with nature raises a compelling question about the very source of his wisdom. If the earth provided his cures, from where did his students draw their most devastating power? Chiron's incurable wound is not just a plot point in an old myth, it is the very heart of a timeless psychological truth. Centuries after his story was first told, the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung gave a name to this powerful pattern, calling it the archetype of the wounded healer. Jung observed that the most effective guides, therapists, and mentors are often those who have been deeply wounded themselves. They do not heal others from a place of detached, sterile perfection, but from a place of hard-earned empathy. Their own suffering becomes a well of understanding, a reference point that allows them to sit with another's pain without judgment or fear. Chiron is the original blueprint for this archetype. His agony from the Hydra's poison was eternal and unfixable. He could not cure himself, yet it was precisely this intimate, lifelong acquaintance with suffering that qualified him to be the ultimate healer and teacher. He did not offer solutions from a distant mountaintop of perfect health. He offered companionship from the trenches of enduring pain. When a student came to him with a physical injury, Chiron understood the body's betrayal. When a pupil arrived with a heart broken by loss or fear, he recognized the landscape of that despair because he lived there. His wound made him authentic, and that authenticity made him trustworthy. We see this archetype alive and well in our world today. Think of the addiction counselor who is a recovering addict themselves. Their credibility does not come from a textbook alone, but from the shared language of struggle and the hard proof of survival. Consider the grief therapist who has navigated profound personal loss. They can hold space for a client's sorrow not as a theory, but as a known territory. In fiction, some of the most beloved mentors follow this same pattern. Albus Dumbledore in Harry Potter carries the guilt and wounds of his tragic past, which deepens his wisdom and his compassion for Harry's own burdens. Gandalf the Grey in The Lord of the Rings is a weary, aged guide who has known defeat and despair, making his hope all the more potent. Even in everyday life, the best teachers are often those who remember the frustration of not understanding a concept, the coaches who recall their own failures on the field, the parents who guide their children through anxieties they once faced themselves. Their authority is softened by humility, their advice tempered by the memory of their own stumbles. This dynamic flips a common assumption on its head. We might think that to be a good healer or teacher, you must be whole, unblemished, and perfectly sorted. The myth of Chiron and the psychology that echoes it suggests the opposite. Our wounds, when integrated and understood, become sources of connection, not isolation. They carve out channels within us through which compassion can flow more freely to others. Chiron's story tells us that wisdom is not the absence of scars, but the understanding of what those scars mean. His eternal pain did not disqualify him from service, it became his qualification. He transformed a personal curse into a universal gift, proving that the deepest healing often begins when someone looks at your suffering and says, in word or spirit, I know this place. I have been here too, and in that shared recognition, the isolation of pain begins to dissolve. So if the wounded healer is such a powerful force, where does that leave the heroes he trained? Did they absorb this lesson of empathy, or did they march off to their destinies armed only with the skills of war, leaving the deeper wisdom behind in the cave? Yet the Centaur's story did not end with the fall of Troy or the closing of the Greek age. His legend traveled west to the heart of the rising Roman Empire, where poets found in his suffering a new depth of human emotion. The Roman poet Ovid, in his epic work The Metamorphoses, gave Chiron a voice of poignant, quiet despair. In Ovid's telling, when the poisoned arrow strikes, the centaur does not rage. He examines the wound, he recognizes the hydra's venom, and he understands with chilling clarity the eternity of agony that awaits him. Ovid paints a picture of a being trapped who longs for a death that his own immortality denies. This Roman portrayal sharpened the emotional core of the myth, focusing less on Chiron's role as a teacher and more on his identity as a sufferer. It made his eventual bargain with Zeus, trading his life for Prometheus's freedom, feel less like a neat plot resolution and more like a hard-won mercy, a release from a torture that had become unbearable. The Romans, masters of law and empire, saw in Chiron a legal paradox of fate, a case where divine justice required a creative and compassionate settlement. As the classical world faded, Chiron's image wandered into the strange and symbolic landscape of the medieval mind. In the illuminated pages of bestiaries, those encyclopedias of mythical and real creatures, centaurs were often presented as symbols of brute duality, of sinful man torn between reason and lust. Yet Chiron frequently escaped this crude categorization. Scribes and illustrators, perhaps recalling fragments of older tales, sometimes singled him out. He might be depicted holding a branch of healing herbs or a scroll, a nod to his unique wisdom amidst a race of monsters. He was softened, moralized, and stripped of his pagan context, becoming less a specific character and more a generalized emblem of learned nature, a precursor to the wise old hermit of Christian allegory. This transformation reached its peak in the Renaissance, when Europe rediscovered the art and literature of antiquity. Artists, drunk on newly translated Greek and Roman texts, brought Chiron back to vivid life, but through a refined, humanist lens. In paintings and sculptures, he was often dramatically sanitized. The wild, shaggy coat of the classical centaur was frequently groomed into something more elegant, even aristocratic. His cave became a tidy, arched grotto, his pupils postured like noble scholars. The focus shifted almost entirely to his role as tutor. We see this in beautiful works that show a gentle, almost grandfatherly Chiron teaching the young Achilles to play the lyre, the scene radiating harmony and civilized learning. The raw, painful duality of his nature, the beast and the sage, was smoothed over. His incurable wound, his bargain with death, these darker threads of the myth were often set aside in favor of a cleaner, more inspirational symbol, education itself. He became the patron of the liberal arts, a figure representing the ideal that knowledge could tame even the wildest nature. Through each of these cultural lenses, Roman poetry's empathetic sorrow, medieval symbolism's moral ambiguity, Renaissance humanism's intellectual ideal, the legend of Chiron was not discarded but adapted. Each era took what it needed from him. They saw a mirror for their own preoccupations, with law and suffering, with sin and salvation, with the revival of ancient wisdom. His story proved to be remarkably flexible because the core questions he embodied are timeless. What is the relationship between our animal nature and our civilized aspirations? How does enduring profound pain shape our capacity for compassion? And can a teacher's legacy survive the erosion of time, changing from a specific mythic biography into a universal symbol? The fact that his image could morph from a dying centaur in a Roman poem to a refined tutor in a Renaissance fresco speaks to the enduring power of his original paradox. He was a fixture of the imagination, a shape-shifter whose essential nobility always shone through, waiting for the next age to rediscover the deeper lessons in his myth. The story of Chiron is not just told in words, but painted in clay, carved in stone, and projected onto screens. His visual journey begins on the curved surfaces of ancient Greek pottery, where black and red figures bring his myth to life. On these vases and drinking cups, we most often see him in his defining role, the teacher. He is depicted with a young Achilles, patiently guiding the boy's fingers on the lyre strings, or handing the infant hero back to his mother, Thetis. The artists captured a profound tenderness in these scenes, Chiron's posture is always calm, his expression wise and focused, his centaur form shown not as monstrous but as dignified and stable, a solid foundation for learning. These images were not mere decoration, they were a widespread popular affirmation of his unique status. In a society that feared wild centaurs, here was one presented as the ultimate civilized influence, a nurturing father figure to Greece's greatest future warrior. Centuries later, Renaissance artists rediscovered Chiron through the lens of humanist ideals. In their paintings, the raw wilderness of Mount Pelion is often tamed into an idyllic pastoral setting. Chiron himself undergoes a transformation. His form becomes more refined, his equine body sometimes resembling a graceful steed from a noble stable rather than a creature of the untamed forest. The focus shifts almost entirely to the transmission of knowledge. In works by painters like Giuseppe Maria Crespi, the scene is intimate and scholarly. The light falls softly on the faces of teacher and student, highlighting the lyre or a scroll, emphasizing the civilizing power of music and intellect. The agony of his wound, so central to the Roman poets, is politely omitted. This Chiron is a symbol of enlightened pedagogy, a classical ideal reborn to inspire a new age of learning. The neoclassical movement of the 18th and 19th centuries brought a different kind of emphasis, heroic suffering and noble form. Sculptors and painters, inspired by the perceived purity of ancient art, often depicted the moment of his injury or his profound endurance. The hybrid body was now rendered with anatomical precision and idealized beauty, every muscle defined, blending human nobility with equine strength. The suffering was not shown as weak, but as stoic and dignified, a testament to his unwavering spirit. This portrayal resonated with an era fascinated by the moral fortitude of classical heroes, framing Chiron's pain as a crucible that forged his legendary compassion. In modern times, his image has fractured and multiplied across countless new mediums. Book illustrations, graphic novels, and fantasy art explore every facet of his duality. Some artists lean into the mystical, surrounding him with glowing herbs and celestial charts. Others emphasize the wild, portraying him as a rugged survivalist, his cave littered with bones and pelts. His pop culture appearances have introduced him to entirely new generations. In Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series, he is Mr. Brunner, the charismatic Latin teacher in a wheelchair, a clever modern disguise for his immortal, wounded nature. Video games cast him as a wise non-player character, a giver of quests and ancient lore in digital landscapes. Each interpretation, from a children's cartoon to a dark fantasy film, picks a thread from the old tapestry. One might highlight his mentorship, another his isolation, another the sheer strangeness of his form. This endless reinvention is the proof of his myth's vitality. Every artist, every filmmaker, every writer who reimagines Chiron is answering the same question his story poses. What does this union of beast and sage mean to us now? Is he a reminder that our own inner wildness can be guided? A symbol of the teacher who bears hidden wounds, or simply an enduring icon of wisdom that comes from outside the boundaries of ordinary life? The fact that his figure remains so recognizable, yet so open to new interpretation, shows that his ancient lessons are never truly finished. They simply wait for the next artist, the next storyteller, to find a fresh way to make the noble centaur healer speak to a new world. His name now travels through the cold, dark expanse beyond Saturn. In 1977, astronomer Charles Cowell made a discovery that would forever link ancient myth to the outer solar system. While surveying the sky from the Palomar Observatory, he spotted a faint, slow-moving point of light between the orbits of Saturn and Uranus. This was no ordinary asteroid. Designated initially as 1977 UB and later officially named 2060 Chiron, this object was the first of its kind. It was a celestial puzzle, a body that defied easy categorization. Astronomers soon realized it shared qualities of both asteroids and comets, a true hybrid in the void. In a moment of poetic inspiration, they named the entire new class of objects after the mythic Centaur, who himself embodied a dual nature. Thus, the astronomical centaurs were born, and with them, Chiron's legacy achieved a cosmic immortality he could never have imagined. These celestial centaurs are the wandering nomads of our solar system's middle realms. They inhabit a chaotic, unstable zone primarily between Jupiter and Neptune, their orbits often tilted and elongated, crossing the paths of the giant planets. What makes them so special, and why does Chiron's name fit them so perfectly? It all comes down to their hybrid behavior. Like asteroids, they are rocky and icy bodies, but like comets, they can become active. When a centaur's orbit brings it closer to the sun, the heat can cause volatile ices on its surface, things like frozen water, carbon monoxide, and methane to vaporize. This creates a temporary, fuzzy atmosphere called a coma, and sometimes even a faint tail. For a time, it looks and acts like a comet. Then, as it moves away, the activity ceases, and it returns to appearing as a simple, inert, rocky body. They are celestial shape-shifters, constantly blurring the line between two established classifications, just as their namesake blurred the line between beast and sage. The discovery of 2060 Chiron itself deepened the mystery. For years, it was considered the sole representative of its class, but as our telescopes grew more powerful, we found more. Pholus, Nessus, Chariklo, and dozens of others now populate this strange family, each named after a centaur from mythology. Their existence tells a story of cosmic migration, believed to be refugees from the distant Kuiper belt, flung inward by gravitational interactions with Neptune. They are temporary residents in their orbits, destined to eventually be ejected from the solar system or collide with a planet or the sun over millions of years. Theirs is a dynamic, unstable existence, a far cry from the eternal fixity of the constellations, yet no less poetic. This astronomical naming is a beautiful testament to how myth informs science, providing a language for the unknown. When those early astronomers looked at their data and saw an object that was neither fully one thing nor the other, they reached back thousands of years for the perfect metaphor. They remembered the story of the wise centaur who was both man and horse, healer and warrior, mortal in spirit yet immortal in form. The parallel was too resonant to ignore. In the silent dance of these icy rocks between the giant worlds, we see a reflection of Chiron's own eternal journey between two states of being. His name, once spoken in caves lit by fire, is now etched into star charts and scientific papers, a bridge not just between natures, but between the stories we tell and the universe we strive to understand. It prompts a final, humbling thought. If our myths can so perfectly map the heavens, what other ancient truths are waiting silently among the stars? Chiron's final choice stands as a quiet revolution against the very idea of heroism. While the warriors he trained sought Clio's undying glory earned through a spectacular death on the battlefield, Chiron's own death was something entirely different. He did not fall in a blaze of combat, his name sung by poets. He chose to lay down his immortality in a deliberate, peaceful bargain. This was not about winning fame, but about ending suffering, both his own and that of another. In the economy of Greek myth, his act redefined excellence or arete. True nobility, he demonstrated, was not found solely in how one faced an enemy, but in how one faced an inescapable fate. His arete was the courage to accept an end as the final, necessary cure. His release was not a defeat, but a profound victory over the agony that had become his prison. For an immortal being, the concept of mortality was not a curse to be feared, but a mercy to be sought. His endless life had become a sentence, and in choosing to end it, he reclaimed agency over his own story. He transformed his greatest vulnerability, the wound that would not heal, into the very instrument of liberation. This reframes the entire Greek understanding of suffering. Pain was not merely something to be endured stoically until a glorious death. It could be a catalyst for a deeper, more compassionate wisdom. Chiron's sacrifice for Prometheus, the titan who suffered for helping humanity, creates a powerful symmetry. One being endured eternal punishment for an act of defiant generosity. The other endured eternal agony from a tragic accident. In their exchange, we see a model of cosmic empathy. Mercy is not a handout from the powerful, but a transaction between equals in pain, a recognition that some sentences are too cruel to be eternal. This quiet, negotiated death, brokered by Heracles and sanctioned by Zeus, suggests that even the rigid laws of fate could be softened by an appeal to compassion. It tells us that the Greeks, for all their celebration of violent glory, also held space for a more profound ideal, that the greatest use of a life, even an endless one, might be to willingly give it up so that another's torment might cease. In the echoing silence after his departure, a question lingers for every hero he left behind. If the ultimate teacher found his excellence not in an endless life of guidance, but in a chosen end, what does that say about the finite, blazing lives of his students? Deep within the forested slopes of Mount Pelion, a hidden entrance offered refuge from the world's chaos. The path to Chiron's cave was not marked by grand statues or towering gates, but by the subtle signs of a mindful inhabitant. A clear, cold spring bubbled from a mossy rock face nearby, its constant trickle providing a gentle soundtrack that masked the distant noises of the wild. The cave mouth itself was draped in emerald moss and creeping ivy, a natural veil that kept the interior cool in summer and insulated in winter. Step inside and the air changed. It was rich and complex, carrying the dry, sweet scent of hanging herbs, thyme, sage, and pungent centauri, mingled with the earthier aroma of clay jars and old parchment. This was no dark, damp hollow, but a luminous sanctuary. Light filtered in from openings in the cave's ceiling, casting soft beams that illuminated floating dust motes like tiny stars. Along the rough-hewn walls, shelves carved from the living stone held his life's work. Neat bundles of roots and dried flowers hung from cords. Dozens of clay pots, each carefully labeled, contained salves, tinctures, and powdered remedies. In another section, papyrus scrolls tied with leather cords rested in niches, records of constellations, medicinal recipes, and epic poetry. The space was organized into distinct areas, a blueprint for a complete education. In one corner lay a warrior's tools, a well-crafted bow, spears of various weights, and a worn leather practice dummy. Just a few steps away, in a pool of the best light, sat the instruments of peace, several lyres of different sizes, their wood polished smooth by hands both large and small, and a simple stone bench for contemplation. A flat, table-like rock served as both desk and examination table, its surface stained by inks and herbs. This cave was the ancient world's first true university, a protected space where curiosity was the only prerequisite. Here, the wild and the civilized did not just meet, they conversed. The spring water from the mountain was used to mix healing potions. The sinew for the bowstrings came from deer he honored. The songs played on the lyre were inspired by the wind in the pines outside. This harmonious integration was the core of Chiron's curriculum. His home was a physical manifestation of his philosophy, proving that wisdom does not require a palace but a purposeful sanctuary. It was a place where a boy could learn to track a deer in the morning and compose an ode to Artemis by afternoon, where the same hands that set a broken bone could later pluck a haunting melody. In this secluded hall of stone and leaf, the ideal of an educated mind was born, far from the politics of cities and the rage of gods, nurtured by the steady, patient presence of a teacher who understood every root in the forest and every note in the scale. This cave was more than a home, it was a living argument for a different way to exist. The cave on Mount Pelion was a crucible for more than just warriors and healers. While Achilles and Asclepius dominate the legends, Chiron's influence quietly shaped the very fabric of ancient culture through a host of lesser-known pupils. His mentorship extended into the pastoral arts, local governance, and even the divine realm, proving his wisdom was the bedrock upon which multiple pillars of civilization were built. Take Aristeas, a minor god often overlooked in the grand epics. He was the son of the huntress Chiron, and according to some traditions, the god Apollo himself. Chiron took in this demigod and taught him not the spear, but the secrets of rural prosperity. Under the Centaur's guidance, Aristeas mastered the arts of cheese-making, learning to curdle milk into lasting, nutritious food. He became the patron of beekeepers, learning to cultivate hives and harvest golden honey without destroying the colony. He understood olive cultivation and the mysteries of animal husbandry. Aristeas represents the peaceful, sustaining side of life that heroes often forget. He did not conquer cities, he sustained them. His knowledge meant communities could thrive, not just survive. By teaching Aristeas, Chiron ensured his legacy fed the belly of Greece as surely as his medical teachings healed its wounds. Then there are the mortal kings like Medeus. In some fragmented tales, this early ruler of the land that would become Media was also a student of the Centaur. For a future king, the lessons would have been about justice, diplomacy, and the weight of command. Chiron would have taught him how to listen to his people as attentively as he listened to the forest, how to make laws that brought order without cruelty, and how to see his kingdom as an ecosystem to be nurtured, not merely territory to be owned. This transforms Chiron from a trainer of individual heroes into a shaper of civil society itself. His cave was a school for statecraft, producing leaders who could build as well as they could battle. Most intriguing of all are the whispers that connect him to the goddess Artemis herself. As the virgin goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, and wild animals, Artemis was a deity of immense and independent power. Yet some local myths suggest that even she, in her youth, sought out the Centaur's unparalleled knowledge of the untamed world. It is a compelling image, the divine huntress whose domain was the forest, sitting with the creature who was half of that forest, learning the deeper rhythms no purely immortal being could grasp. From him, she might have learned the most subtle tracking signs, the medicinal properties of plants known only to the oldest creatures, or the ethical code of a true hunter, to take only what is needed and to honor the life given. This connection, however apocryphal, elevates Chiron's status to almost unimaginable heights. It suggests his wisdom was so profound that even an Olympian deity would acknowledge his mastery in her own domain. When we pull back and view this broader roster of students, a stunning picture emerges. Chiron was not merely a tutor for a few destined demigods. He was a foundational node in the network of Greek myth, a singular source of practical and ethical knowledge that flowed outward into every corner of their imagined world. From his cave came the warrior, the healer, the farmer, the king, and even insights for the goddess of the wild. His teachings literally built civilization from the ground up. They provided its food, its laws, its health, its defense, and its spiritual connection to nature. This cements his role as the ultimate civilizing force, a being who took the raw chaos of the primordial world and, through patient, compassionate instruction, showed how to weave it into the tapestry of a functioning, noble society. His influence was the quiet hum of the hive, the just rule of a distant kingdom, and the respectful silence of a hunter in the sacred grove. If his most famous students wrote their names in blood and glory, these lesser-known pupils wrote his legacy into the daily bread and enduring peace of the ancient world. The poison was a living contradiction, a substance that defied the very order Chiron's life represented. To understand its horror, we must first look to its source, the Lernaean Hydra. This was no ordinary serpent. In the swamps of Lerna, it grew a grotesque, regenerative form. Cut off one of its many heads, and two more would sprout in its place. Its breath alone could kill, and its blood was a festering, black corruption. When Heracles, aided by his nephew Iolaus, finally defeated it by cauterizing each neck stump to prevent regrowth, he dipped his arrowheads in the monster's toxic blood. This act created weapons of ultimate violation. The poison was not a simple toxin, it was the concentrated essence of primordial chaos. The Hydra itself was a child of the ancient Titans, a creature from the time before the ordered rule of Zeus. It represented the untamed, regenerative, and overwhelming wildness that civilization constantly fought to push back. Its blood was anti-knowledge, anti-cure, anti-order. It was the swamp claiming the mountain, the scream silencing the lyre. When that arrow pierced Chiron's thigh, it was not merely a physical injury. It was an injection of pure, undiluted chaos into the body of the ultimate civilizer. This explains why the greatest healer in the world could not mend himself. His entire art was based on principles of balance, diagnosis, and natural harmony. He worked with the logic of the earth. The Hydra's venom operated on a different, older logic, one of endless, mindless proliferation and decay. It was a force that rejected categorization and remedy. Think of it as a supernatural infection, a curse in liquid form. The stories say it caused unending, feverish agony, a burning that would have killed a mortal instantly, but which an immortal constitution could only endure, never overcome. It was a wound that actively fought against healing, a piece of the wildest, most anarchic past forever lodged in the present. This transforms Chiron's suffering from a random tragedy into a profound symbolic struggle. His body became the eternal battleground between the two great forces of his myth, the ordered wisdom he championed and the chaotic wildness he had mastered within himself. The poison was the untamed Centaur herd made liquid, the scream of the wedding feast, the deceit of Nessus, all distilled into a single, burning point. It represented the limit of his hard-won knowledge. He could teach a hero how to survive any monster, but he could not extract the essence of monsterhood from his own flesh. He could soothe any fever born of natural imbalance, but this was a fever born of divine antithesis. In bearing this, Chiron embodied the most human of truths, that some pains cannot be solved, only carried. His wisdom was not proven by a cure, but by his dignity in the face of the incurable. The wound made him a living lesson in the acceptance of inevitable suffering, a teacher who understood the curriculum of agony because he was enrolled in it for life. So what does one do with a pain that will never leave? The word itself carries the echo of his story. Chiron's legacy is not confined to ancient vases or star charts. It lives in the very language we speak and the symbols we use to make sense of our world. Consider the term chironomy, a word rarely used today but rich with meaning. It refers to the art of gesture, the eloquent movement of the hands to convey meaning, often in conjunction with speech or song. The root is his name, Chiron. This connection is profound. It suggests the ancient Greeks saw the Centaur not just as a physical teacher, but as a master of non-verbal communication, his very presence and movements a form of instruction. In a culture that valued oratory, the idea that wisdom could be expressed through the graceful, intentional motion of the hands links directly to the image of Chiron guiding a pupil's fingers on a lyre or demonstrating the precise gathering of a healing herb. His name became synonymous with knowledge expressed through the body, a perfect metaphor for a being who was wisdom incarnate in a physical form. His symbolic power marched into the medieval world emblazoned on shields and banners. In the complex visual language of heraldry, the centaur became a potent charge, a symbol on a coat of arms. While sometimes representing raw strength or a wild, untamed nature, the centaur in this context often carried a more specific, noble meaning borrowed directly from the myth. It could symbolize a triumph of intellect over base instinct, or the masterful combination of disparate qualities, the strategic mind of a leader with the relentless endurance of a warrior. A knight bearing a centaur on his crest was aligning himself with an ideal of disciplined duality, declaring that his power was guided by reason, much like Chiron himself. This adoption into heraldry shows how his image was purified and repurposed, moving from a pagan mythological figure to an emblem of chivalric virtue, his story flexible enough to serve new masters and new ideals. In the modern celestial sphere, his name takes on a deeply psychological dimension. The discovery of the asteroid Chiron in the late 20th century was not just a scientific event, it was a gift to symbolic thinkers. Modern astrology, which often seeks archetypal patterns in the heavens, seized upon this celestial body with great interest. Astrologers labeled it the wounded healer, a direct and powerful invocation of the Jungian archetype. In an astrological chart, the placement of Chiron is said to indicate our deepest, most enduring wound, a source of lifelong pain or insecurity that feels incurable. But crucially, it also represents the potential gift that arises from that wound. It is the point where, by facing our own suffering with compassion and seeking to understand it, we develop a unique capacity to heal, guide, or teach others in that same area. This interpretation has made Chiron one of the most compelling points in contemporary astrological practice. It provides a narrative for personal suffering that is not meaningless but potentially transformative, a direct inheritance from the myth of the Centaur, whose agony made him the wisest of teachers. His influence quietly permeates specialized fields of thought today. In discussions of pedagogy, the model of Chiron is invoked as the ideal mentor, one who integrates practical skill with ethical reasoning, who nurtures the whole person rather than just imparting facts. In integrative medicine, which seeks to treat the mind, body, and spirit as one, Chiron stands as an ancient precursor, his herbalism and holistic care a mythic foundation for modern practices that look beyond the symptom to the root cause of illness. Most broadly, he is a timeless symbol for the reconciliation of opposites. Psychologists, philosophers, and artists turn to his figure when discussing the integration of our conscious and unconscious minds, our civilized selves and our primal instincts, our intellect and our intuition. He represents the hard, beautiful work of making ourselves whole. This journey from a gesture of the hand to a point in a birth chart proves a single, powerful truth. Chiron's myth endures not because it is a fixed, dusty tale, but because it is a living template. It provides a story flexible enough to frame our ongoing struggles with pain, our quest for knowledge, and our eternal effort to bridge the divides within ourselves. His name, whispered in a cave millennia ago, now helps us map the stars and understand our own deepest scars. From a miraculous birth born of divine disguise to a final, starlit release, Chiron's journey is a map of transformation. He was a creature of two worlds who built a third, a being of endless pain who became a source of profound healing. His story is not one of unblemished victory, but of dignified endurance. It asks what we do with the wounds that will not heal, with the contradictions that define us, and with the time we are given, whether it is a single lifetime or an eternity. Chiron answered by turning his own agony into a classroom, his isolation into a sanctuary, and his very nature into a lesson on balance. He took the sons of gods and kings, raw forces of destiny, and taught them that true strength harmonizes the spear and the lyre, the battle cry and the healing chant. His ultimate sacrifice, trading his painful immortality for another's freedom, was the final, logical act of the healer, using his own end to cure a suffering greater than his own. So why does this ancient centaur's tale still echo? Because he embodies the most human of struggles, the fight to make meaning from suffering, to build bridges across our inner divides, and to use whatever wisdom we gain to lift others up. He is the archetype of the wounded healer, the patient teacher, and the quiet civilizer whose legacy is woven into the stars above and the symbols we live by below. His myth reminds us that our greatest weaknesses, when faced with courage and compassion, can become the very source of our strength and our service to the world. What lesson from the noble Centaur speaks to you? Is it the power of mentoring, the dignity in enduring pain, or the courage to integrate all parts of yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into the heart of ancient wisdom, please like this video and subscribe for more explorations into the myths that shape us. Thank you for listening.